So in this video what we're going to look at is some more data types, and because JavaScript only really has 3 or 4, so JavaScript you've got your number, you've got a boolean, you've got a string and an array. They're really the only data types you've got. We're going to need to use a different programming language to have a look at some different data types we can use. And for this we're going to use the language C#, which is almost identical to a language like Java and fairly similar to C actually, or at least C++. So different data types which we can look at. We've got an int, and that stands for an integer, which is a whole number, so an example would be 7. We've got a float, and that stands for a floating point number. An example of that would be 13.25. It's also known as a real number. We've got a boolean, which is exactly like we do in JavaScript, so that's a true or a false, so that would be an example there. And we've got a char or a char, and that stands for a character, so one letter, one character, and we use a single quote for characters. We've got string, just like we do in JavaScript. And so a string we use with double quotes. And those are the data types which we're going to look at now. C# and other languages have far more data types than that, but these are the ones which we're taking a look at. And so the question comes, why would we split a number? So numbers are really easy. You know, I just put a number in it. Why would I split that into a floating point number and an integer? And it's all to do with the way that these things are stored when they're saved in RAM. And so if we draw out a bit of RAM here, and these are the memory locations here. Now if I say to it, I want to have an int or an integer, and it's going to be a 1-byte integer, and each of those locations is 1 byte, I can just block out this 1 byte, and that's going to be used for the variable which is an integer. If I said this is a 2-byte integer, then I could block out instantly 2 bytes. Just like that. But the problem comes if I'm in a language like JavaScript and I say, okay, I'd like to have a number. Does it block out 1 byte, 2 bytes? And it doesn't know, and it has to look to see how you're using it, and it might start off by blocking out 1, and then maybe you need to have 2, and so it's got to create more space. And this means that there can be an overhead in how much processing time it takes. So having integers, having floating point numbers, doubles, and all these other different data types is useful, and it means that you're getting closer to the faster code which you want to write. But for a programmer it can be more inconvenient, and so that's why certain languages like JavaScript and ActionScript don't bother doing it. So let's have a quick look at these. There's nothing too difficult about them. Let's just see how they run in C#. So here we are in C#. Don't worry about all this code up here. C# writes all of that for you. When you open up in a console program like this, it will start the program here at this point where the flashing cursor is. And so I want to make some variables. I'm going to do it around a player in a game. So there's going to be an integer, and when I do variables I say the data type first, and then I say the variable name. So that's going to store the player's age, and we'll put down 15. I'll assign the value 15 there. Floating point number, and so we'll store their height in meters, and that will be 1.63. And then I'm going to set up a boolean, and that could be whether they're playing the game or not, and so we'll have that as true. A char character, so that will be 1 letter, and I'm going to use that to store the gender of the player, which will be female. And finally I'm going to have a string, and that string is going to store the player's name, and we'll put the name there in double quotes. Notice the double quotes and the single quotes. Another thing here, when I do numbers, so for an integer I just put in the normal number. For a floating point number I have to put f afterwards just to say it's a floating point number. And now it's happy with everything I've done, but it's giving me a load of warnings down here. And the warning says the variable age is assigned but its value is never used. And so here I've got the variable age, I've assigned it something, but I never use it. And so this is a warning saying you're allowed to do that, but are you sure you want to? And in this case I haven't finished my code, so that's fine. But if I'd finished my code, it would be saying, why are you doing this? It would be an idea that I might have made a mistake. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to output all of these. So just like you do on a document in JavaScript, I'm going to output these to the console in C#. And I'm going to take the age and I'm going to concatenate that to the height and concatenate that to whether they're playing the game, and concatenate to the gender, and finally concatenate to their name. And just underneath that, because it's going to quickly show me the console and then disappear, I'm going to do this other one called read line, which will just hold it at that point. So there we go, everything should now be okay, but it's having a little problem with it, because unlike JavaScript, it can't quite work. It's got something called strict typing, and it's saying that I can't have the plus operator applying to a floating point number and a Boolean. So because it knows that this is playing games a Boolean, it's like, how on earth could I concatenate that or add that to a floating point number? And the truth is it can't. JavaScript figures out, you're putting it on the screen, I'll just convert it to a string for you. Whereas in C#, it doesn't let you. It says if you're going to convert it to a string, you need to tell me you want to convert it to a string. I'm not going to do any of the work for you. And that can be very frustrating. However, it does prevent you from accidentally making mistakes where the computer tries to work out, or the programming language tries to work out what you're doing, and it's not actually what you want to do. So there we go. I don't need to convert the gender and the name, so a character and a string, it knows what to do with those. So each of the numbers and my Boolean here, so the Boolean here, each of them I've converted into a string. I can now concatenate them all together and put those onto the console, and it's giving me no errors there. So I try and run this program, and let's just move that into screen so you can see it. And so here we go, age 15, 1.63, which is the height. True because they're playing the game, F female, and EV for the name. Press return and that disappears. And so that's a program there. Very, very simple, very similar to JavaScript in the way it works. This time we're showing the different data types which we have available in other languages.